bit about Kenneth Burke's dramatism, and we still are. I'm going to cover it for us all, but I would like to connect it back to this idea of perception, and that really everything in our world comes down to our perception of the things that happen in the world, the people that we know, perception of self, perception of others, of circumstances, and so on and so forth. And the reason I want to do that is we all heard the news that President Trump, the First Lady, and of course several people within his entourage and campaign has come down with the coronavirus. And I found it very interesting to see how people were perceiving what this meant to them in light of this, pretty huge news. Now, it's complicated, and we're going to talk a lot more about this next week as we look at dramatism in relation to this particular happenstance and also to the bigger scene of the coronavirus, because the coronavirus itself becomes a scene. So Kenneth Burke, drawing from the work of actors, by the way, and myself being one, I appreciated this theory as a result of being able to really identify with it. He said the best way to understand or start to uncover what's really happening in any scene, in any situation, is to look at it from multiple points of view. So taking from the Actor's Handbook, Kenneth Burke came up with what he calls the dramatism approach. He looks at the act, what was done, the scene, where was it taking place? And usually the scene has a wide and a narrow scope. A wide scope could be the scene right now for looking at the coronavirus. We could look at the world. We could look at a scene as being smaller or more narrow, such as the United States, or what happens in your own household, right? So the scene will really cover multiple aspects of where something takes place. Agency, how was it accomplished? When we talk about agency, we're really talking about how we made certain decisions, for something to happen. And we'll look at this more specifically next week when we go into the idea of the coronavirus under dramatism. But just keep that in mind, that agency is how something is accomplished, through what means, if you will. Purpose refers to the why. Why was it accomplished? Why did we do what we did? What was the motivating factor for us to take a particular action? And of course, the agent, that is the actor, if you will, the person who is doing the act, who is involved in the act. And when we look at any scene whatsoever, and I'm not just talking about theater, I'm talking about real life, because, as William Shakespeare just said, all life is a stage, basically, and we are merely actors on that stage. And there's some truism in that observation that if we realize everything really is about our perception of the other, our perception of the scene, our perception of the act, our perception of the agency. If we realize that perception here is the key, then we're able to see how everything is basically a stage. Because most facts in the world, 2 + 2 = 4, there's a very narrow road of facts. We know very few facts. Okay, but we know a lot of perception. Perception is out here about our world, and facts in some ways is right here. Opinion out here, facts, truth, actuality here. So we function in a world of perception. Everything we involve ourselves in, everything we touch and feel. This is a cup of Earl Grey tea, and I also have some almond milk in it. Now, my perception of this cup of tea is going to be different than yours. Like, if you don't like Earl Grey tea, you're going to have a different perception of that experience of drinking Earl Grey tea than I am. because that's just the way our world actually functions. But we walk in our world as if we know absolute fact, absolute truth, as if we are secure in the information we have. And the funny thing is that, it's not the fact that information now is pretty much questionable. Most information we receive is very, very questionable anymore. But, it's always been questionable because our perceptions and how they lie and what we think really is what determines how we walk through our world. So even though we get a lot of misinformation, it just means that our perception is even a little bit more wonky. But it has always existed. And so why am I going on about perception, cup of tea, perception, blah, blah, blah? Well, we are all perceiving this event where the actor or the agent in this case, which I would say right now is Trump, that we are all perceiving his experience of having COVID from very different points of view. And so I went on social media today and I just did a really quick kind of summary of the type of posts I'm seeing on Twitter from friends on Facebook and so on and so forth. The hashtag of Trump has COVID is a big hashtag this morning. And these are some of the perceptions people have. There are a lot of people praying for Trump, the First Lady, and everybody who's been infected by the coronavirus. Then we have the absolute polar opposite. Good, I hope he dies. He should have listened to Dr. Fauci. That was another one that I'm seeing. I'm seeing memes of President Trump in a coffin. There are a lot of people who feel really bad about his illness, and yet there's also a lot of people who feel bad at feeling joy as a result of his illness. I saw several memes of Trump in a hospital bed and a nurse putting bleach in his IV drip. So that speaks volumes as well. Then, of course, there's a lot of worries about Vice President Biden and the realization that Trump probably had the coronavirus during the debate. So the question is, has Biden been exposed to the virus? Then we have several memes I saw of the witches of the world saying, you doubted us, but we made it happen. We deserve a thank you. So that was pretty wonderful too. And I say that as I hold up my cup that says, as above, so below. So here we go. There's feeling that we can really make something happen in the world. And I think that's, the meme is of witches, but I've seen actually this sentiment also for other people through prayer, through will, and so on and so forth. And then the big one I saw today is this a political ploy? Maybe Trump doesn't have the coronavirus at all, but maybe he doesn't want to have to be in a situation where he has to go to another debate again. And then there was another person I saw who said Trump is trying to dominate the news cycle by saying that he has COVID. And then I saw another post suggesting that Trump is lying about having COVID, that his whole campaign is, indeed the whole Republican Party is, because they know he's not doing very well in the polls. So that's a big theme that I came across today. And then I saw a lot of memes that said, see, wear your mask. And then I saw a lot of opposite memes that said, see, this is all a hoax, that Trump is a hoax. So the hoax thing has become turned around and placed upon Trump himself. And then, of course, there's a lot of well wishes of a speedy recovery. So this grouping of popular thematic snippets, if you will, that I have come across this morning reflect not only our very differing perceptions of a scene, and the scene in this case is Trump getting COVID, and how we interpret that information. The fact that we have such a wide, diverse view of reaction to this actuality tells us how wide and how unreliable our perceptions can sometimes be. And of course, we've talked about how Plato really hated perceptions. In his allegory of the cave, he makes a really big point that most everything we experience in life are nothing but shadow puppets on a cave wall. And if we are released from our prisoner space of having to sit in a seat and look at these, these puppets that are being projected onto the wall for us, and as we realize our perceptions are often faulty, then we become liberated. Then we have the path to freedom. But if we come back and try to free the other prisoners before they are ready to be freed from their perceptions, from their illusions, then there's a really good chance that our ass is going to get kicked and we might die. Because at the end of the allegory of the cave, that's what happens, is that the original prisoner who got released, who is able to discover how faulty his sensory perceptions were, and he discovered the great world of abstract thought and mathematics and truth, that when he came back and he released the prisoners, they were so pissed off. They were so pissed off about being challenged, their perceptions being challenged, that they turn around and they basically kill this guy, right? So perceptions has always been something in the human experience that has been problematic. And we have a situation where it's a no-win situation in some ways. We live our life on perceptions. So no matter how we may be interpreting a scene, we may be looking at it from what was done or where it took place or who was involved in the action or why it happened. All of these things, nothing but our perceptions. So our perceptions rule our lives. Our perceptions are detrimental to our lives. And the question becomes, I think, from not only a philosophical point of view, but ultimately from a lived point of view, is how do you temper your perceptions so that they are as close to reality in your lived experience as you can possibly make them? And the wonderful thing about things like Kenneth Burke and dramatism is it really allows us to start to look at our own perceptions and the perceptions of the world around us. So one of the interesting things is that you're seeing a lot of people repeat what Trump said at the debate earlier this week. He said, I have a mask right here. And he pulled out the mask and he said, I put on the mask, when I think I need it. I don't wear masks like him, referring to Biden. Every time you see Biden, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from me, and he shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen. One perception. So this is something that Trump has said recently, and as many of us know, that for the most part, Trump has downplayed masks, downplayed a lot of the concerns about the coronavirus. So a statement like this, after he gets the coronavirus, this is something people are immediately going to dive into and attack. And the Republicans know this right now. They know the rhetoric that has come out of President Trump's mouth. And so they're being very careful. So instead of talking about coronavirus consequences, importance of having these safety features, because they want to have the scene be one of compassion for the president rather than one of, well, this is what happens, when you just flaunt the safety, flaunt the safety needs in the face of coronavirus. Of course, you're going to get the coronavirus at some point, but they don't want to focus on that. They need to control the scene. So what they are focusing on is the health of the president and all of those involved. So they're saying, the president and, of course, the first lady, they're doing great. Here's to a speedy recovery with prayers and much loves on behalf of everyone down here in the West Wing. That's the statement coming out of the White House, because the White House is Republican right now, and they need to control the scene. They want to control the scene. Now, the Democrats want to control the scene too, but So they have to have rhetoric that helps their point of view. Again, perception. It's all about perception. So the Democrats are saying, here's to hoping they both get through it and recover in good health. I also hope it's a teachable moment about the perils and the reach of COVID-19. And this was treated by Liz Smith, a veteran Democratic political consultant. She said, wear a mask, socially distance, understand if it can hit the president, it will hit you too. So the Democrats are taking a very different way, different way of trying to control the perceptions of the people regarding this. They're trying to show some compassion because, if you really are a leader of the Democratic Party and you come out and say, well, thank God he deserved it, right? It's gonna look bad for you. And it's not just about looks. I think that people really do have compassion. I have compassion for the president. I wouldn't wish this virus on anyone, no matter how much I may disagree with how the White House and our current government has handled the coronavirus crisis. But when we're in the middle of a political cycle, controlling those perceptions are vital, and how we give out our perception to others also becomes vital. So we have two different people, or two different states of thinking, Republican, conservative, Democratic, and liberal. How do we approach this crisis? What message do we want to send out? Now, it's interesting to note that we also have perception of the stock market. As soon as we found out that President Trump indeed tested positive for the coronavirus, the stock market went down. First, it dropped 430 points at the opening, and then it recovered a little bit. And the last time I looked, it was only trading down about 200 points. The S&P fell 500, about 0.8%, and the NASDAQ composite declined 0.9%. So the stock market functions on perception as well. And this is super important to understand. Part of the reason, I think, that we see a lot of Republicans and Democrats, but right now, because the Republicans are in power, we're seeing it a little bit more from their corner. But part of the reason that we talk about the wonderful economy in relation to the stock market is the perception. The stock market in some ways is divorced from our everyday lives, from our everyday jobs, but it becomes the pulse, the indicator of how we are doing. And it doesn't always indicate correctly. The stock market's rise and falls are based upon the perceptions that we are receiving from our political news, from our social news, and also from economic news throughout the world. But you'll notice when something that is creating turmoil occurs, there is an equal reaction by our economic standards, specifically the stock market, because the stock market functions on perception as well, far more than absolute scientific estimations and calculations. And yes, there's a lot of algorithms involved, but ultimately something bad happens, we see a reaction. So perception is everything, folks. And I guess that's what I want to end on this week. And we're going to look more about the scene of COVID and how when we are analyzing that scene from different points of view, we end up with totally different perceptions of what is going on and why it's going on. But the helpful thing, I think, is the analysis. By doing the analysis from multiple points of view, we accomplish a few things. First, we start to be able to open and widen our own perspective of the world, of processes, and of actions. It allows us to better understand people's points of view and people's motivation for action. It also gets us a little bit closer to maybe truth. When we analyze something from multiple points of view and we look for threads that interconnect. So you might see this particular thread from this point of view, and then you have this other point of view. And when it interacts, there's something about that axis point that may have a little bit extra truth in it. And that's where we need to start digging to have a better understanding of how the perceptions are impacting our reality. And we'll talk a lot more about that next week, but I did want to give a primer for this week. And so let's have our meditation. It's a crazy world, my friends. Please take a seat. And I want to encourage you to take this few moments right now, today, whether you are listening live or if you catch a rebroadcast later, to really participate in the meditations. Try to make yourself comfortable. You can sit in a chair or on the floor. Maybe take a lay down on that floor or on your bed. But it's best to put yourself in a position in which you won't fall asleep, but still can achieve great relaxation, alertness at the same time. I want you to take a few deep breaths. Just breathe really deeply into your core. Inhale for a count of 5. Hold that breath for a count of 1 or 2, and then exhale for a count of 6 or 7. And as you exhale, I want to encourage you to try to release all of your breath before inhaling again. Let's just breathe together for a few moments as we find our center and root ourselves into our space and life and our own processes. Part of the reason we meditate is to help us become more aware of our perceptions in such a way that it allows us to expand our understanding of the reality we are living in. Perceptions aren't lies. You could probably see them as a plastic, mobile, loose truth for the moment you're in it. But to have the realization, the understanding that there's no absolute in your perception is vital. Our perceptions change with new information, with new emotions. When our scene changes, when new agents or actors come into our life, one moment you could be downplaying the use of a mask, and the next moment you could be championing it because your circumstances have changed. And so your perspective changes, your perceptions change. And that's actually very human. And it means that you are learning from experiences. You're taking in that information. You are incorporating it into what you already know or perceive to be true. And you're allowing that new information to inform you in different ways. Now, as you breathe, I want you to bring your breath to the heart center and just feel the expansion of your ribs, of your well-being, of your love, coming from the chest. And as you are here, I would like you to imagine with every breath you bring into the heart center, you are bringing love and healing, joy, contentment, hope, you might want to imagine a moment in your life where a single piece of new information altered your perceptions. Maybe it altered your perception of the situation, of the scene, where it took place. Maybe your perception of the agent or the actor changed. Maybe your perception of self changed. Imagine the transition of how you had to readjust pragmatically in that situation. Keep breathing as you imagine this scene in your life. Did the change in perception feel comfortable? Uncomfortable? Some changes in our perception are small, and they don't seem to affect our lives very dramatically. Other perceptions, challenged by big pieces of information, well, it can throw us for a loop. I had a perception of what home should be. And I was preparing to move to that special home on the big island of Hawaii. And then when Kilauea blew and my house was laid under 800 feet of lava, my perception of home had to change dramatically. But if I would have stayed stuck in that original perception of the scene, of the place, I wouldn't be able to see and be grateful for the home I have now, which is also beautiful, although different location, different house, different lifestyle. But the important thing is I didn't stay stuck in that original perception, but getting unstuck, well, that took a lot of doing. Today I challenge you to be the observer as you listen to people talk about what happened, the coronavirus, the president, what may happen, the potential events that may result. Just be the observer as you listen to all of these different perspectives, all of these different perceptions. And if you don't agree with them, just sit with them. You don't have to agree, but just agree to listen, and to consider why the perceptions exist. I thank you all for joining me this week. We've had a good week of good discussions about listening, about the role of perception and culture. I'll be returning next week on Tuesday, and we'll pick up where we left off. I thank you all again for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I hope that everybody who is sick gets healthy. And I hope you take care of yourself. Aloha, mahalo, and namaste.